Hello everybody, welcome back to some Dwarven Forge painting. Today we're going to talk about weathering, just some tips and tricks, some extra steps you can use to punch up your collection of pieces or add some special effects to a unique piece that you like a lot. For weathering, it's going to be a lot of washes, primarily in things like browns and greens, dirt and muck, some rust and verdigris as well, but it's basically just thinning your paints and feathering them out to get a varied deposit of whatever elements have been on your pieces. So I'm going to start with just a stone wall. You can use this on buildings, on your Aranthor mountains, and that kind of thing here. Just using a rocky example to get this started. So some examples of paints: I've pulled base wood, sludge, and some black just to darken up some mixes here and there. But just a handful of earthy tones can go a long way here, and you can do a lot of custom mixes as you go. So all I'm doing is putting the paints on my palette, getting some moisture in my brush, and thinning down the paint just a little bit so it'll flow. And what's nice about these effects is you can be kind of sloppy. In fact, that works in your favor because there's been moisture dripping down and that kind of thing, so it can actually give you some cool results. So I have some thin paint on my brush, and I'm just letting it flow into the recesses. Now you can see it looks pretty bright on here, but when it's wet, it looks a lot brighter than how it'll actually dry. And sometimes you can even paint on the model, that I like to say, which of course you're always painting on the model, but you can change the effect as you go. So we have a patch here, and I can start pulling it out. So it doesn't need to be set how I first did it. Now the important thing here is I want to add some more layers on top of this. Of course, let it dry, which will take slightly longer sometimes with diluted paints. So just be a little patient. If you see it glistening, don't move on to your next layer yet. But what you can do is do a different section while this other one is drying, or do a different piece if you're doing a batch. So it's really not so tough on you. Now I'm just doing the same thing here with a different color. Some sludge or fungus has formed. Again, I placed it, and now I'm going back with a damp brush and just playing with it right on the model. And now I'm even mixing them here as they're both wet, just to get some of that variance. I'll pull some of this brown over here. So this is why this is one of my favorite things to do, because it's so kind of organic and painterly. So you can get a lot of cool variance with just messing around like this on a sloppy piece. And so I went pretty well diluted here, so you can see it's kind of wet and glistening right now, but it'll be a pretty thin film over all these stones, which I like. But you can always add more and more layers, and in fact, you can leave the transparency how it is once this dries and add more as you go further down the piece. You can see I'm kind of doing the bottom of the piece mostly. That's where my focus is, just because theoretically the moisture has been dripping down, but you can go as all over the place as you want with this effect. But it can also give you, if you focus on one area like the bottom, it can also give you a nice gradient that will give you more contrast on the piece. Which, speaking of which, I'm going to throw some black in the mix here. I'm not always even putting water directly into my paint mix. I'm just getting extra moisture on the brush. Look at that nice dark brown. And it's easy too, when you're doing a wash or thinking of a wash, to just imagine it as like slopping the whole piece, but you can feel free to be selective with this too. Just gonna pick a recess here and there with this mix and place it exactly where you want it. And then you can always mess around like we've been doing here. So now I have this nice dark line here. I noticed some of the darkness went a little higher than I wanted, so I'll just pull it down, and some of it will remain, but it will give sort of a medium tone there. So there's a lot of happy accidents that happen.
This is pretty similar to what we do for the sewers and stuff, right?
Yeah. Sometimes the techniques are a little heavier handed, just because it's kind of easier in mass production. But you can see you can be a little more precise and a little more calculated without it taking a lot of time. You know, especially for something like green. A lot of times I like to do the black and browns for an overall gradient, and then with something like green, like a real collection of muck, that's when I'll be selective here. So now it changes the color palette, adds a little accent on there, but still looks pretty organic.
And you're doing this on a factory painted piece too, so
Yeah.
even if you didn't get your stuff unpainted, you can just do this real quick to touch up your existing pieces.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of was my idea here. Is look, you have a handful of factory painted stuff. Maybe you've watched some painting videos. You're interested in trying out painting. Look, it's halfway done for you. Well, it's all the way done for you. This is just extra credit steps that you can experiment with. I could have stopped ages ago. You can stop at any point. I'm just having fun experimenting. So you can see these effects can be really, really fast and not take a lot of effort or precision. I'm even taking just some straight black here to kind of wet blend into the mix. By wet blend, I just mean the different layers of paint are still wet, and that's just kind of referring to pulling it together, how I've been doing. But you see, I selected the area I was focusing on by placing it where it's going to be most opaque, right on the bottom here, and then pulling it up. And that's about it. Now I'm just having fun. Especially on some of these brighter, dry brushed areas. Some other quick ones too. Actually, that just happened by accident. When your paint's wet, just hit a spot, wipe it with your finger. There you go. Or even just leave it. Leave a heavier spot. Now look at the same color, real quick, literally finger painting, and you have all this variance. That's why I love weathering. I also have a city's wood floor here just to emulate things like your docks, if you have a barge, for things like sludge. But really it's just the same techniques. It's just what are you choosing to use for your colors? Where are you placing it? So for the barge, this is actually when I discovered the color sludge. I had never even heard of it among our range, painting the Wildlands barge. But it's quickly become one of my favorite colors. So this is a little different than what we did before. I'm just picking some cracks where it would collect, but I'm being pretty thick here. So again, I'm rinsing the brush, wiping it off a little bit, but keeping it damp, and then we just pull it. And some you can leave heavier, and some you can really thin out and spread out. So there you go. I mean, look at that. That was like less than a minute. There's all kinds of variants, and all it was one brush full of paint, a quick rinse, and pull it around. There you go. Real easy, but adds so much.
And it looks good and makes sense on basically anything made of wood that you want to look aged.
Yeah, and I like doing these effects too because it adds interesting colors to the scheme of the pieces without being really in your face and out there. So it still fits in an organic realm, but it adds a lot of color interest. And don't be afraid to try this on other pieces too. I'll just do it real quick on the Tudor as well. The stone is great because of all the heavier texture that can grab this stuff, but even on a flat surface, this is especially good for the heavy placement and then pulling. And you can really see how it thins it out. So again, it's a little hard to see when it's wet, but this will be a nice thin film over the base color here. Try out the green. And that's what's great with using the moisture to your advantage is, I mean, look at this. If I don't like that color on here, it comes right off. If I maybe went too heavy on my application, I'm going to do a smaller area, a little more subtle. Just go right back. Won't even use the brush. Now that's pretty subtle, but even from table view, it adds just a little variation to the surface. So I could do this forever, but that's where I'll stop for some of the weathering. We'll move on to some verdigris and rust here. Now I'm moving on to a metal cage piece. We're doing pretty much the same effects, the same ideas, just with different colors to get different results and emulate different weatherings. So we're gonna do some verdigris and rust on the metal cage here. So I have some orange, and one of my favorite colors, Bubbles Blue, which I kind of use as a default verdigris thing. Never mind the science of what kind of metal this is, but you can apply it to whatever type of metal that you have in your collection. So all I'm doing is getting a damp brush. And for the rust, I like to have a pretty opaque deposit somewhere. So I did kind of thin my paint, or at least have a pretty damp brush. But I'm not going to thin this out quite as much. This is just personal preference. You can do your feathering wet blending thing that we've been doing previously here right away if you'd like. But I'm kind of letting that be and letting that be a little more opaque. Let it dry, and then we can go back and do the wet effects over it to get that variation. So now I'm putting out a different color deep lava. A lot of times for this stuff, I just like to put out a drop of a bunch of different colors. It doesn't have to necessarily be different steps, but just so you have access to them to mix them up as you go. It can be really fun and sort of spontaneous process. So I have deep lava for some of my older rust, since we have the nice bright new heavy deposit. See, now we still have like the nice collection of the orange, but I pretty much just did a quick glaze, just a diluted, very diluted layer over the orange, but it tints it enough to make it look like really a bunch of different colors of rust. You can, with your wet paint, pull it down like the drops. Use your finger trick again if it gets a little heavy. Go back to the orange. I just love how this can be so back and forth. It's really just to your taste, wherever your curiosity is going.
Since we've got those busted version of the pieces, I kind of like the idea of putting rust like in the middle of that section a bit to give your barbarian like a little clue at the table, like, hey, this part's weaker if you want to try to like punch through this.
That is really cool. And there you go. So here you have the more pristine version, and with just a couple minutes of fun experimentation with the paints, it adds a ton of diversity in the colors and makes it almost a brand new piece, I think. Like, you can have a the magical cage, or like the kingdoms, prisons, or something like that, or a real run-down dungeon, and this is the same piece, obviously. So it's not precise. It doesn't take a lot of practice even. It's really just sloppy paint, moving it around to make it brand new. Can't forget the Bubbles Blue, probably more on a bronzy surface, but it's the same thing. And this is my favorite. I've already talked about how it adds some points of interest in the color. I mean, this color will do that instantly. It's just so neat. So, same thing. Make a heavy deposit, pull it apart with some thinner layers, pull down some moisture drops on your bronzy stuff. Finger trick once in a while. And there you go. You can experiment with any colors you have in your collection for these types of effects. And a lot of times I use all of them at the same time. So there you have it, some rust, some weathering, some verdigris. If you have any more questions, please feel free to join me on Hamster's Hobby Hang every Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern, Twitch, Dwarven Forge Live. Hop on our Discord. Our community loves answering questions and helping you with new ideas as you experiment with painting. And if you have a cool effect that you like, that you painted up, please post it to social media and tag us. We always love to see it, and I'd love to see your cool idea so I can put it into my own painting. So thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time.